Early one morning in early May 2025, the atmosphere inside the duty room of the Bayou Cane precinct in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana, was still quite peaceful. The officer on duty was reviewing the logbook when the phone suddenly rang, shattering the silence. He picked it up, his voice calm with professional habit. "Bayou Cane Precinct, how can I help you?" On the other end of the line was the voice of an elderly man, strained with panic and fear, interspersed with ragged breaths. "Hello, is this the police?" "Help, please help," the man said, out of breath. Get over to the small river inlet on Blackbird Island, near the old red dock. There's a body floating in the river, caught in the water hyacinths." The duty officer shot to his feet. A report of a body in the river was always a matter of extreme seriousness. He immediately activated the recording device, gripped his pen tightly, and tried to calm the caller. "Sir, please stay calm. Can you tell me your name and your exact location? Are you sure you're not mistaken?" "Mistaken? How could I be mistaken?" the man snapped, his fear palpable. "My name is Sully. I've been a fisherman here for decades. It's the body of a man, face down in the water. Please hurry, it's horrible." "All right, Mr. Sully, please stay where you are, don't go near it, and try to keep anyone else from touching the scene. We'll be there immediately." Hanging up the phone, the duty officer wasted no time. He immediately reported the entire incident to the precinct command and the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Department. An urgent order was issued. Within 10 minutes, a team from the Sheriff's Department, led by a lieutenant from the Homicide Division, was on a specialized speedboat, cutting through the waves toward Blackbird Island. When the boat arrived, a chaotic scene awaited them. Sully, the man who had called, was standing trembling on the bank, alongside a few other locals who had just arrived, all staring at the patch of water hyacinths with horrified expressions. The team quickly approached the scene in a smaller boat. Just as the caller had described, trapped amidst the dense water hyacinths was the body of a man, floating face down, his back bobbing on the surface. The scene was immediately secured. The victim's body was carefully brought to shore. A preliminary examination determined the victim to be a man in his early 40s, in good physical condition. He was wearing casual clothes, and there were no visible signs of injury on his body. Notably, all of his personal belongings were still intact in his pant pocket, a leather wallet containing over $200 in cash and identification, and a smartphone. Everything was there, just waterlogged. The initial assessment was that this was likely an accidental drowning due to intoxication. The victim had not been robbed, and there were no signs of a struggle. This theory was reinforced when locals mentioned that the area had many riverside bars and that similar incidents had occurred before. The case was temporarily logged as an accident. However, just as the procedures at the scene were being carried out, an unexpected development occurred back at the Bayou Cane precinct. A woman with a distraught face and eyes swollen from crying rushed into the duty room. "My name is Sarah Baker. I'm 38 years old," she said, her voice trembling with anxiety. "Officer, I'm here to report my husband missing. My husband is John Baker, 42 years old. Last night, he went out drinking with his nephew and never came home. I've been calling his phone all night, but he hasn't answered. This morning, I searched everywhere and asked all his friends, but no one knows where he is." The duty officer listened to her report, cross-referencing the information with what he had just received from the scene. The description Sarah provided, the age, build, and even the clothes John was wearing last night matched the victim they had just found with chilling accuracy. He immediately reported this coincidence to the team at the scene. The heartbreaking identification took place shortly after at the county morgue, where the victim's body had been transported. When the white sheet was pulled back to reveal the familiar but now purple and cold face of her husband, Sarah Baker could no longer stand. She let out a heart-wrenching scream and collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The victim was confirmed to be John Baker. The case seemed like it could be closed as a tragic accident. But, as per standard procedure, John Baker's body was still sent to the Terrebonne Parish Forensic Science Center for a full autopsy to determine the precise cause of death. And it was here that the true nature of the case was exposed. The medical examiner, an expert with many years of experience, initially found nothing unusual during the external examination. However, as he washed the victim's head to inspect it more closely, his hand paused at the nape of the neck, just below the hairline. There was a small area of swelling and subcutaneous bruising. After shaving the hair in that area, a small wound was revealed. It wasn't large, but when the medical examiner pressed on it, he felt an abnormal depression in the skull. An urgent X-ray was performed, and the results shocked everyone. The image showed that beneath the small wound, the victim's skull had a fracture line about 2 inches long. Inside the cranium was a large hematoma. This was a severe traumatic brain injury caused by a powerful blow from a blunt object. Furthermore, when examining the chest and lungs, the medical examiner found a critical contradiction. The amount of water in the victim's lungs was minimal, not nearly enough to cause death by drowning. The victim's blood alcohol level was very high, but he had not drowned. When this information was shared with the family, Sarah and other relatives confirmed a crucial detail. Although John drank occasionally, he was an excellent swimmer. He was born and raised in this river region. Drowning in a shallow inlet, even while drunk, was almost impossible. All the pieces were now on the table. A concealed skull fracture, very little water in the lungs, and the victim's exceptional swimming ability all pointed in one direction. The director of the Forensic Science Center picked up the phone and made an urgent call to the sheriff of Terrebonne Parish. "Sheriff," he said in a grave tone, "this was not an accidental drowning. The victim, John Baker, did not drown. He was murdered. There's a skull fracture at the back of his head from an attack with a blunt object. Someone killed him and threw his body into the river to stage the scene." This information immediately transformed a seemingly simple case into a high-priority homicide investigation. That very afternoon, a special task force composed of the most elite investigators from the Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Department Homicide Division was formed under the command of Detective Marcus Thorne. The investigation to find the hidden killer had officially begun. The task force was assembled quickly, bringing together the most seasoned investigators and detectives under the command of Detective Marcus Thorne, a lawman renowned for his sharp thinking and ability to analyze criminal psychology. In the very first case meeting, Detective Thorne outlined the primary lines of investigation for what seemed like a search for a killer in a maze with no clear entrance. "We have a murder victim," Detective Thorne said to the task force, his voice clear and precise, "and a clumsily staged crime scene. The killer could be an amateur who acted on impulse, but they could also be incredibly cunning, intentionally trying to mislead us. Our immediate task is to paint a complete social portrait of the victim, John Baker. His enemies, his friends, everyone must be put under the microscope." The first line of inquiry focused on conflicts in the victim's work and past social relationships. John Baker had worked for many years in Houston, Texas, a complex labor environment with people from all walks of life. He had recently returned home with a considerable amount of savings. The theory of personal revenge or a long-standing business dispute from his time away was prioritized. A special team was immediately dispatched to Houston. The detectives worked tirelessly, visiting the construction sites where John had worked, meeting with his former colleagues, roommates, and even his supervisors. They dug into every detail, every relationship, hoping to find a conflict, a debt, or a grudge that could have led to the murder. But after nearly a week of verification, the results led to a dead end. In the eyes of everyone who knew him, John Baker was a gentle, hard-working, and somewhat reserved man. He didn't drink heavily, didn't gamble, and didn't owe anyone a dime. He was known for being honest and willing to help his colleagues. No one could point to any conflict he had with anyone. The report from Houston concluded that there were no identifiable motives for revenge. The second line of investigation, the possibility of a robbery homicide, was also quickly dismissed. The initial findings at the scene were clear. All of the victim's assets, including a leather wallet with over $200 in cash, his ID, and an expensive smartphone, were still in his pocket. The killer's motive was clearly not money. With both external lines of investigation hitting a wall, the task force was forced to turn its focus back to the victim's final hours. All attention now fell on a single individual, Kevin Price, 20 years old, the victim's nephew and the last person to be with John Baker before he was killed. Kevin Price was summoned to the sheriff's department to provide a detailed statement. He appeared as a mild-mannered, studious young man. His face showed clear signs of fatigue and grief after several days of family mourning. His eyes were red and swollen. In front of the investigators, Kevin was very cooperative, coherently recounting the entire series of events from that fateful night. That evening, around 7 p.m., I went over to my uncle's house to ask him to go out for a drink, Kevin began, his voice filled with regret and self-blame. We hadn't seen each other in a long time, and now that he was back for good, I was really happy. I wanted us to catch up. We went to a riverside grill, not far from his house. Was anyone else there with you? Detective Thorne asked. No, sir, just the two of us. Then, around 9 p.m., two of my friends stopped by and joined us. How much did you two drink? Quite a bit, sir. Uncle John doesn't usually drink much, but he was happy that day, so he had a little too much. He got drunk before I did. Around 11 p.m., he said he was tired, had a headache, and wanted to go home and sleep. I saw he was really drunk and offered to take him home, but he refused. He said the house was close and he could walk it in a minute. He wanted to walk to sober up. He even told me to stay and hang out with my friends. What did you do after your uncle left? Sir, I stayed for about another 15 or 20 minutes, but by then I was feeling pretty drunk myself. My head was spinning. I said goodbye to my friends and paid the bill to leave. But I was too drunk to walk straight. I was afraid it would be dangerous to drive home in that state, and if I got home that late and drunk, my parents would kill me. So I called my best friend, Michael Evans. His house is right near the grill, and I asked if I could crash there for the night. He said yes, so I walked over to his house and stayed there. You slept at your friend's house until the next morning? Yes, sir. The next morning when I woke up, my head was still aching. I was about to go home when I got a call from my mom, telling me the terrible news about Uncle John. Kevin bowed his head, his shoulders shaking as he tried to suppress a sob. Kevin's testimony was incredibly detailed, coherent, and logical. Every detail fit the normal progression of a night out drinking. He even provided the full names and addresses of the friends who had joined them and, crucially, the best friend he had stayed with. Immediately after the interview, a team of detectives was sent to verify all the details. The results only added to the task force's frustration. Everything Kevin said was true. The two friends who had joined them for drinks confirmed that Kevin and his uncle had drunk a lot and that John had left first. More importantly, the family of his friend, Michael Evans, confirmed without a doubt that Kevin had arrived at their house that night, extremely intoxicated. He could barely speak, just stumbled into the room and passed out on the bed, sleeping soundly until the next morning. Kevin Price's alibi was rock solid. He couldn't have been in two places at once. He couldn't have been sleeping soundly at his friend's house while also murdering his uncle somewhere else. The investigation had once again reached a complete standstill. Theories of revenge and robbery had been eliminated. The last known witness had an unshakable alibi. The case was shrouded in a thick fog, with no light breaking through. The killer seemed to be a phantom who had appeared, committed the crime, and vanished without a trace. In the task force's meeting room, the silence was suffocating. Days went by, and the investigators worked relentlessly, but the case file remained thin, with no new valuable leads. Just as everyone was on the verge of despair, Detective Marcus Thorne, who had been silent for days, simply re-watching the interrogation videos, suddenly spoke up. Something's not right here. Everyone turned to look at him. Look at the demeanor of these two, he said, pointing to two screens showing the interviews with Sarah Baker and Kevin Price. Look at the wife, Sarah. Amidst her overwhelming grief, her agony when identifying her husband's body, I also see fear. An unnatural fear, as if she's afraid of something even more than her husband's death. And now look at the nephew, Kevin Price, he continued, his gaze intense. He appears very sad. He cries. His testimony has no holes. His alibi is too perfect. Everything is perfect. But for some reason, I get the feeling his grief is an act. A performance that is too perfect. This sharp insight, based on the commander's years of experience in criminal psychology, opened up a new, bold, and unexpected line of reasoning. It forced the entire team to look at the case through a completely different lens. Detective Thorne's sharp observation, though initially based on professional intuition, became a new investigative mandate. A quiet, almost secret, direction was charted, not focusing on external conflicts, but drilling deep into the victim's own family, specifically the relationship between the wife, Sarah Baker, and the nephew, Kevin Price. The wife's fear and the nephew's perfection, Thorne repeated in a case meeting. These two abnormal psychological states must be connected. We might be overlooking a secret right in front of our eyes. A secret big enough to make a wife more fearful than of her husband's death and for a nephew to perform a flawless act. The order was given. Sarah Baker's cell phone, an item that had been collected as evidence initially but was deemed of little value, now became the central focus of the investigation. The best experts from the cybercrimes unit of the sheriff's department were tasked with cracking it. They didn't just review what was left, they created a complete forensic image of the phone's entire memory and non-alterable digital copy. From there, they used specialized software and the most complex algorithms to trace and recover deleted data, pieces of information that its owner had deliberately tried to hide. The work took 2 full days and nights, and the result it yielded went far beyond all expectations, revealing a shocking truth, more complex and darker than even the most audacious investigators could have imagined. An analysis of the call and text message history during the 2 years John was working out of town showed an undeniable fact. An unusually dense pattern of communication existed between Sarah and her nephew, Kevin. Thousands of calls and tens of thousands of messages had been exchanged between them. But the most telling aspect was not the quantity, but the timing and its sudden change. The communication was most frequent during sensitive hours, typically after 10 p.m. And then, like a knife cut, all calls and messages between the two abruptly stopped on the very day John Baker returned home to live. This sudden silence was more damning than any words. It pointed to a secret relationship, something that had to be hidden at all costs when the husband came back. But the most decisive piece of evidence, the one that exposed the full nature of this sick relationship, came from a hidden, deleted folder in the phone's memory. The experts successfully recovered a short video clip, only about 30 seconds long. It was filmed with the phone's front camera. The quality was low, and the shaky angle suggested it was filmed secretly. But its content was all too clear and raw. It was a clip recording an intimate act between Sarah and her own nephew, Kevin Price. In the clip, Sarah's face showed reluctance and anguish, while Kevin's was the complete opposite. The secret was out. The theory of an affair was proven correct, but its nature was not that of a typical illicit romance. The clip, along with recovered text messages of a threatening and controlling nature, painted a completely different story, a story of abuse, control, and fear. With this irrefutable evidence in hand, the task force decided to summon Sarah Baker once again. This meeting took place in a completely different atmosphere, no longer filled with questions of sympathy and support. Sitting across from Sarah was Detective Marcus Thorne, his eyes sharp and serious. "Sarah," he began, "we've asked you to come in today not to ask more about your husband's murder, but to ask about your relationship with your nephew, Kevin Price." Upon hearing this, Sarah's face, already gaunt from grief, turned deathly pale. She looked down, her hands clenched together, trembling. "I don't understand what you're talking about, officer. Kevin and I just have a normal aunt-nephew relationship." "Normal?" Thorne pressed, his voice rising slightly. "Does a normal aunt-nephew relationship involve thousands of phone calls in the middle of the night? Does a normal relationship require cutting off all contact the moment your husband returns?" He pushed the call log analysis across the table toward her. "This is what we found. How do you explain this?" Sarah looked at the dense statistics on the paper, her whole body beginning to shake. She couldn't explain. She could only shake her head and cry. "We know you're scared, Sarah," Detective Thorne said, his tone softening. "We also know that Kevin Price is holding something of yours on his phone. Something you don't want your husband or anyone else in the world to see. Is it because of that something that you've had to stay silent, to do everything he asked for so long?" That question, a precisely aimed psychological blow, completely shattered the last wall of defense of the pitiful woman. She looked up at the detective, her eyes filled with pain, humiliation, and a glimmer of hope for liberation. She burst into tears, a sob that carried years of pent-up fear. "Yes," she whispered through her tears. "Yes, it's him. He ruined my life. He's a monster." Sarah's first confession, though just a whispered phrase, broke the tense silence in the interrogation room. It was like the first crack in a dam about to burst. And then, after a long moment of sobbing, the entire tragic story, a horrifying secret she had been forced to bury for 2 years, poured out like an unstoppable flood. "2 years ago," she began, her voice breaking, lost in sobs. "At that time, my husband, John, had been in Houston for over a year. I was home alone, managing the farm, taking care of the house. Missing my husband, I was so lonely. Kevin was still in school then, but he came by often. He's my husband's nephew, and I treated him like my own. She explained that Kevin was initially a very good nephew. He was polite, hardworking, and seeing her alone, he would often come over to help with heavy chores like fixing the fence or patching the kitchen roof. When she was sad, he would sit and talk with her, which made her feel comforted, easing some of her loneliness. She had completely trusted him, seeing him as a source of emotional support, like a younger brother in the family. But I was wrong. Her voice turned bitter. I didn't see the demon hiding behind that gentle, studious face. The tragedy happened on a rainy afternoon. She was very sick with a high fever, lying alone in the house. Kevin heard about it and brought her medicine and soup. He was very attentive, taking care of her diligently. I was delirious with fever, completely drained of strength, she said, closing her eyes as if to block out the horrific memory. I had fallen asleep, and when I was at my weakest, unable to fight back, he did that despicable thing to me. After the assault, Kevin didn't leave immediately. He sat there, watching his aunt cry in humiliation. And then he produced a weapon far more terrifying than violence. He held up his phone. On the screen was the short clip he had secretly recorded of the entire act. He told me, she recounted, trembling. He said if I dared to say a word to anyone, he would send this clip to John. He would post it online for the whole town to see. He said that then, not only him, but me, my husband, this entire family, we wouldn't be able to show our faces in public ever again. That threat struck her greatest weakness. A woman living in a small, rural community, who valued family honor and reputation more than her own life. She was terrified. Fear and shame forced her into silence, and that silence marked the beginning of 2 years of hell on earth. From the day he had the video, Kevin Price completely transformed into a monster. He was no longer the well-behaved nephew. He treated her like a plaything, his personal sex slave. Whenever he wanted, day or night, he would show up, using the video to threaten her and force her to submit. I had to live in constant fear and disgust, she said through her tears. Every time I heard his truck pull up outside, my heart would feel like it was about to beat out of my chest. I lost weight, couldn't eat or sleep. Everyone around just thought I was sick with longing for my husband. No one knew the horrible truth I was enduring. Her only glimmer of hope came when she heard that John had decided to return home for good. I cried with joy, she recalled. I thought that when he came back, my nightmare would end. Kevin wouldn't dare to do anything anymore. I cut off all contact, block his number. I hoped he would get the message and leave me alone. But she was wrong again. John's return didn't scare Kevin instead. It ignited his selfish and sick possessiveness to a fanatical degree. He couldn't accept losing the aunt who had been his property. He began a new campaign of psychological terror. He kept texting me from unknown numbers, threatening me. She trembled. He said if I didn't keep listening to him, he would make good on his promise and send the video to John. He said he would destroy the happiness I had just gotten back. And then, the final tragedy struck on that fateful night. That evening, when he came to the house to ask John to go for a drink, I saw something strange in his eyes. A jealousy, a resentment he was trying to hide. My intuition told me something bad was going to happen. I tried to make an excuse, said I was tired to keep my husband home, but John wouldn't listen. He still thought Kevin was a good nephew. He could never have imagined his true face. I spent that whole night terrified. I couldn't reach John on his phone. And the next morning, when I heard the news, I knew. I knew immediately that it was him. He was the one who did it. Then why didn't you voice your suspicions from the start? Detective Thorne asked. Voice them. Sarah laughed bitterly. Who would have believed me? I had no proof. People would just think I was distraught and not thinking clearly. And most importantly, I was scared. I was scared he would release that video. My husband had just died. I couldn't let his honor be tarnished. I couldn't let people know he had been betrayed by his own wife and nephew. I was cornered, with no other choice but to remain silent. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes staring directly at the detective. I was wrong to stay silent, but I swear I had nothing to do with John's death. I never imagined Kevin could be so cruel. Just like my husband, I am also his victim. Please, you have to believe me." Sarah's testimony concluded. The interrogation room fell silent, a silence born of shock and profound indignation. The story they had just heard was not just a witness statement, but a painful indictment of a dual crime, where one victim was murdered physically and another was tormented mentally. The theory of a love triangle had been completely demolished. The truth of the case was far more disgusting and pathological. Kevin Price was not a blind lover, but a demon in human form, a predator who had exploited family ties to satisfy his lust and was willing to kill to protect his possession. After the session ended, Detective Marcus Thorne stood for a long time, looking at Sarah's tear-stained statement, his face etched with steely determination. "So this is the truth," he said to his colleagues. "He's not a lover, he's a monster. Do we have a warrant to search Kevin Price's residence? We need to find the original video. This time, he won't be able to deny it." The warrant for an emergency search of Kevin Price's residence was approved by the District Attorney's Office that same afternoon. A team comprising homicide detectives and tech experts was quickly deployed. The Price family home was a well-kept house at the end of a quiet lane. When the team entered, Kevin's entire family, including his parents, were home. They were completely stunned, having no idea what was happening when the officers appeared with a search warrant. Kevin, who was watching TV in the living room, turned pale but tried to remain calm. "Officers, what's going on?" Kevin's father, the older brother of the victim, John Baker, asked in bewilderment. "We are executing a warrant," a detective said curtly, showing the family the document and requesting their cooperation. The search was conducted quickly and professionally. The tech experts' main targets were Kevin Price's personal electronic devices, his smartphone and an old laptop. Kevin was ordered to provide the passwords to unlock them. He hesitated, but faced with the firm demeanor of the officers, he was forced to comply. While other detectives searched the rest of the house, a tech expert in the living room connected Kevin's phone to a specialized device. With a few professional maneuvers, he gained access to the phone's entire file structure, including hidden and deleted files. And he found it. In a folder cleverly named Schoolwork, there was another unnamed subfolder with its attributes set to hidden. And inside that hidden folder was a single video file, the original, nearly 2-minute-long clip recording the entire depraved act Kevin had committed against his aunt, Sarah Baker. "Detective, we found key evidence," the expert reported. When the expert showed the phone, with the video open, to Detective Thorne, Kevin, who was sitting nearby, saw it. His face went as white as a sheet. He knew it was all over. The evidence of his first crime, the crime that had set all the later tragedies in motion, was now exposed. "Kevin Price, you're under arrest." The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked shut around the wrists of the studious-looking young man. In front of his parents' disbelieving eyes, he was escorted out to the car, head bowed in shame. The final interrogation of Kevin Price took place that same night. There was no more evasion, no more feigned grief. Sitting in the interrogation room, facing Detective Thorne, Kevin was just a criminal, trembling as he awaited judgment. Detective Thorne didn't need to use many interrogation techniques. He simply placed 2 items on the table. On one side was the tear-stained statement from Sarah Baker. On the other was the smartphone, open to the sick video. "Kevin," Detective Thorne began, his voice low but heavy with authority. "The aunt you used this video to control and torment for 2 years has told us everything. We know what you did to her. And we also know that you are the one who murdered your uncle, John Baker. Do you want to tell us yourself, or not?" Kevin looked at the 2 pieces of evidence on the table, then looked up at the detective. The final wall of his psychological defense crumbled completely. There was no way out, no room for denial. He burst into tears, a gut-wrenching sob of fear. "Yes, officer, it was me." And then, the entire murderous plot, plan, and actions of the demon in student's clothing were confessed from his own mouth. Kevin admitted to the sick obsession he had for his aunt. He admitted to taking advantage of Sarah's loneliness and vulnerability to assault her and then film it to control her. When he heard his uncle was returning home for good, a mad jealousy and selfishness welled up inside him. He couldn't accept losing control of his sexual slave. He didn't want to share her with anyone, not even her own husband. "I couldn't accept losing her," Kevin confessed through tears. "The idea to kill Uncle John started then. I thought that if he just disappeared, everything would go back to the way it was. Sarah would be mine again. A perfect murder plan, in his mind, was hatched. He knew his uncle was a great swimmer but a poor drinker. He intentionally chose a riverside bar, an ideal location to stage a drowning accident. That night, he plied his uncle with alcohol. When he saw John was completely intoxicated, he pretended to tell him to go home first. He knew the only path from the bar to his uncle's house was a dark and deserted dirt road along the river. That was the spot he chose to make his move. After John staggered away, Kevin didn't stay behind. He secretly followed, keeping a safe distance. When they reached the deserted stretch of road, he picked up a large, hard, and dry cypress branch that was lying by the side of the road. I circled around behind him, he recounted, trembling. Uncle John was unsteady on his feet. I used all my strength and hit him once, hard, on the back of the neck. John collapsed instantly, without a sound. After making sure his uncle was dead, he dragged the body to the river's edge and pushed it into the water. He also threw the murder weapon into the river to dispose of it. After committing the murder, he calmly returned to his friend's house, pretending to be drunk, and spent the night there to create his alibi. He believed everyone would just think his uncle got drunk and fell in the river, a common enough death in that region. He never imagined that a tiny skull fracture could unravel his supposedly perfect plan. The confession was complete. The portrait of the killer was now stark and whole. A young man with a gentle, studious appearance had hidden a demonic soul, willing to murder his own uncle just to satisfy a sick, possessive lust. After the interrogation, Detective Thorne stood silently in the room, looking at Kevin Price's signed confession. The silence was more chilling than the gruesome admissions. He felt a profound rage, not just at the crime, but at the moral decay of the perpetrator. He picked up his radio, his voice cold and decisive. Confession is complete. Tomorrow morning, we'll take the suspect back to the crime scenes for a reenactment. Every crime must be brought to light. Kevin Price's confession closed the most intense psychological phase of the investigation. The killer's portrait was fully drawn, not a faceless phantom, but a demon wearing the familiar mask of a gentle nephew. The task force's job now was to solidify every link in the chain of evidence, preparing an ironclad case file to ensure the crime was punished appropriately. The next morning, the crime scene reenactment was conducted. This is a critical legal procedure aimed at recreating the suspect's criminal acts visually and objectively, under the close supervision of the District Attorney's Office and in the presence of defense counsel. Kevin Price was led out of the detention center. The young man looked completely broken, walking unsteadily, his eyes vacant. Being forced to return and reenact the actions he had tried so hard to bury was a form of extreme psychological torture. The convoy of law enforcement vehicles took him back to Blackbird Island. The first reenactment site was the deserted dirt road by the river. Here, with a mannequin of similar size to the victim, John Baker, Kevin had to tremblingly act out the fatal blow to the back of the neck. He reenacted how he had stealthily followed his drunken uncle, picked up the cypress branch, and struck from behind. Every action, no matter how small, was performed mechanically amidst the chilling silence of the onlookers. The second part took place at the river's edge. He acted out the struggle of dragging his uncle's body from the road down to the bank and then pushing it with all his might into the water. He also pointed out the location where he had thrown the murder weapon. A police dive team was subsequently deployed, and following Kevin's direction, they found the iron-hard cypress branch buried deep in the mud. The reenactment concluded. Every act of the killer had been documented in detail with photographs and video. The results of the reenactment perfectly matched the suspect's confession and the autopsy findings, forming an undeniable trifecta of evidence: confession, reenactment, and forensic analysis. At the same time, another painful task had to be carried out. Detective Thorne had to meet directly with Kevin Price's parents, who were also the victim's brother and sister-in-law. He had to inform them of the cruel truth. Their beloved son was the one who had brutally murdered his own brother. The meeting took place amidst tears and collapse. Kevin's father, a strong man his whole life, was stunned into silence, unable to believe what he was hearing. Kevin's mother fainted. The family's tragedy had reached its peak. They were both the family of the victim and the family of the killer. The pain of losing a brother mixed with the shame and agony of their son's crime created a wound too deep to ever heal. The investigative phase of the case officially ended. The Terrebonne Parish Sheriff's Department completed its final report, transferring the entire case file to the District Attorney's Office, recommending the prosecution of Kevin Price for first-degree murder with multiple aggravating circumstances. With clear and irrefutable evidence, the DA's office quickly issued an indictment, charging Kevin Price to be tried before the Superior Court. The indictment laid out all of the defendant's inhumane actions, from using despicable means to control and violate his aunt to ruthlessly murdering his uncle to conceal his crimes and satisfy his personal desires. In the county jail, Kevin Price lived through the days awaiting final judgment. He no longer cried or panicked, he just sat silently, withdrawn in a corner. Perhaps he knew that for the crimes he had committed, there was no other path but the law's harshest punishment. Outside, Sarah Baker, after providing her testimony, began a new and difficult life. She sold the house on the island, a place that held too many painful memories, and moved back in with her parents. She had to face her own guilt, her grief for her deceased husband, and the pitying, judgmental eyes of those around her. Her life, though she was a victim, had also been permanently destroyed. The indictment was served. The day Kevin Price would have to face justice and pay the price for his betrayal of kinship was set. In October 2025, the Terrebonne Parish Superior Court opened the trial of the defendant, Kevin Price, on the charge of murder. The trial drew significant public attention not only because of the brutality of the case but also because of the twisted family tragedy. The killer and the victim were uncle and nephew. The person with related rights and obligations was the victim's wife, who was also a victim of another crime. In the solemn courtroom, a heavy atmosphere prevailed. In the gallery reserved for the victim's family, only Sarah Baker sat alone, her gaunt face lost in her own private grief. In another row, the defendant's parents, also the victim's brother and sister-in-law, sat with their heads bowed, not daring to look up. Their tragedy was having to be in court as both the victim's family and the killer's parents. The defendant, Kevin Price, was led to the stand. The studious-looking young man of before was now a haggard, broken wreck, his eyes lifeless. After the prosecutor from the DA's office read the indictment, exposing all of the defendant's crimes, the trial moved to the examination phase. Facing questions from the judge, Kevin Price admitted to all of his criminal acts. He recounted once more the story of his sick obsession, the blackmail, and finally, the plan to kill his own uncle. He wept the late tears of remorse and fear. The most emotional and painful part of the examination was when the court called Sarah Baker to the stand as a person with related rights and obligations, as well as a key witness. Standing before the court, she had to once again recount the nightmare that had lasted 2 years. She described how she had been abused by her own nephew, blackmailed with a video, and turned into a sex slave. She spoke of the fear, the shame, and the helplessness she felt when her husband returned, unable to tell the truth. Her tearful testimony silenced the entire courtroom. It was not just an indictment of Kevin Price's crimes, but also a mournful cry for help from a victim who had endured too much suffering. During the subsequent closing arguments, the prosecutor delivered a powerful statement condemning the defendant's complete lack of humanity. The actions of the defendant, Kevin Price, are an affront to human decency. The defendant not only broke the law but also trampled upon the sacred bonds of kinship, betraying the trust of the very uncle who loved him dearly. For a sick, possessive desire, the defendant callously planned and brutally murdered the man who helped raise him. This crime is unforgivable. There are no words that can excuse it. Based on this analysis, the prosecution recommended the court impose the highest possible penalty, the death penalty. When given the chance to make a final statement, Kevin Price no longer sobbed. He turned towards Sarah Baker, his aunt, his victim. "Aunt Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. I know it's too late. I ruined your life. I committed an unforgivable sin. I don't dare ask for your forgiveness. I just want to say I'm sorry." Then he turned to his parents. "Mom, Dad, I have failed you. I am so sorry." After deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, and the judge delivered the final sentence. The actions of the defendant, Kevin Price, have demonstrated a complete degradation of morality and a total loss of humanity. The defendant committed not one crime but a series of crimes, from using despicable means to control and violate the dignity of another, to the act of murder to conceal his crimes and satisfy his personal desires. These actions show that the defendant is beyond rehabilitation and poses an extraordinary danger to society. Pursuant to the Penal Code, The court finds the defendant, Kevin Price, guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentence for the defendant, Kevin Price, is death. As the death sentence was announced, Kevin Price's legs gave out, and he collapsed to the floor. He did not scream or cry, but silently accepted the tragic fate he had brought upon himself. In the gallery, his parents held each other and wept uncontrollably. They had lost a brother, and now they had lost their son. Sarah Baker also quietly raised a hand to cover her reddened eyes. The trial was over, but the tragedy for her family would last forever. The case was closed. The killer was brought to justice, but the wounds he left on his family and in the community could never be healed. The case on Blackbird Island is a painful lesson about silence. The silence of an abused and controlled wife who could not cry out for help in time. The silence of those around who may have sensed something was wrong but considered it a private family matter. It was this silence that inadvertently nurtured evil, allowing it to sprout, grow, and ultimately cause an irreversible tragedy. It is also a warning that danger does not always come from strangers but from those closest to us, those who wear the mask of kinship to commit sinful acts. It shows that behind a facade of gentle studiousness can hide a demonic soul, and behind the peace of a small riverside community can simmer horrifying tragedies.